Okay. Hey y'all, it's editor-in-chief Lexi of CopyWrite magazine, and I'm here today with
Marquise Mays. I'm here.
Hey. And we also have our lovely intern.
Hello. My name is Tanasia.
What's up?
Today we want to talk about, this incredible film that Marquise has been working on and is going to be releasing soon. So we kind of wanted to just give you guys a preview of what that's going to look like, having a little Q&A about the inspiration and what we can expect to see in this film and kind of go from there. So let's see. Let's pull up this wonderful trailer. So okay.
Oh my gosh.
Milwaukee. On wood, it ain't nobody quite like you. Like us. On wood, it ain't nobody that talk quite like us. Southern and Chicago roots, yeah. But we done made it our own. On what? And on wood, it ain't nobody flies us. Cause they can rock Air Force Ones. But they ain't dookies to them. On wood, it ain't nobody that sound like us. That NPS beat ring off any surface in any setting. And bow in my projects forever classic. And the bass gon' bump out whoever trunk. But the ball hitting cans was the loudest beat on any street. I hope those things are forever. I hope those things never change. The Heartland.
Yeah. Okay. So, first thing, the trailer is incredible. One thing that really, kind of inspires me is all the black faces. That's not something that's super normal about, films, especially in Milwaukee. That's not something that's normally presented. So what kind of inspired you to really make this film?
I think what inspired me was a mix between like having to move back to Milwaukee, but then also like what was happening during COVID. I don't know. So I moved back to Milwaukee this year. And when I got back, I was hanging out with family, hanging out with my cousins and, talking to my little cousins and stuff like that. And, they're around the ages of 9, 10, 12 years old. And they would always say like, I can't wait to leave Milwaukee. I can't wait to go and move. And they couldn't even give me really an answer on why or like what they weren't getting in Milwaukee that they had to go somewhere else. And then I kind of realized that like that's where it starts around the ages of like 9, 10, 11 is when we are kind of the main goal for a black kid is to leave Milwaukee or find some way out. And I wanted to tap into that. I wanted to sit back. I'm always inspired by like the conversations I'm having, the person that I am and who I'm becoming. And I think at that moment, coming back to Milwaukee now, like in my mid-20s, it was something I'm just like, wow, my city is so beautiful, and it has so much history. It has so much legacy. It has so many nuances that like, I don't think that no matter where I went, like I can never make that place Milwaukee ever. So like I was living in LA because I went to school in LA and I was there for 2 years, and every film that I did, every research paper that I wrote about Black film was inspired by Milwaukee. And I'm just like, hey, I can't make LA Milwaukee. I can't make Madison, Wisconsin, Milwaukee, like the places that I did go. So I was like, what does it look like to come back to Milwaukee and make a Milwaukee film, And I think what happened was I realized like, growing up in Milwaukee, it was so complicated. And I don't think no one asked me as a kid how I felt about Alexis Patterson or how I felt about Frank Jude or how I felt about young Black boys going missing or mysteriously drowning. Like no one asked me about those things. They were just like my life. And then on top of that, it got, then we couldn't go places. We couldn't do things. We couldn't go to the mall. We would get surveilled at the mall. We can't go to restaurants. We can't go eat. So things that like teenagers in the suburbs do to gain social capital, to figure out and learn themselves, we never had the access to. And then I thought about it and I was like, but we did, because we went to dance wars and we made twanging and banging videos. So like the fact that like Black kids in this city despite the many times that Milwaukee has just been like, we don't mess with y'all. The many times that Black kids was just like, that's all right, we still love you, we gonna make this what it is. And we did. And I think that's kind of what drew me to this, because I was just like, yo, there's nothing like a Black kid from Milwaukee. And I think it's time that we kind of think about what we've been through, how that has influenced who we are today.
Absolutely. I think everything you just said really resonates with me. I think it'll resonate with a lot of our audience, like especially being creatives, right? There's always the idea that you have to leave. You have to leave Milwaukee in order to like mark your success. You have to go. If that's LA, if that's Atlanta, if that's New York, and even in closer proximity, if that's Chicago, you know, the idea that you have to kind of go and displace yourself from a community that might have been hard, but it was you. It's you. It's a part of you. And I think that resonates a lot. And I think the story, you know, that you're talking about, or that imagery that you're talking about, is present in your trailer. You see these people in these spaces. You hear this voice of this young person, you know, kind of depicting this situation and this place that we've never really talked about from a really genuine and authentic place. So I kind of, going off of that, I kind of want to know, like, what kind of process did you go through selecting what you were going to show, what you were going to talk about? Like, how did you really get into the nitty gritty details of that?
It's hard, because I do think with Milwaukee, there's so many stories that can be told about Milwaukee, right? So like, when people see this trailer, like, the one thing I always want people to know is just like, by the way, that this is not the only story. Like, there's so many other stories that have to be told. I just hope that this is a catalyst for all of those people to feel okay to tell their stories. So that's first. And then I think when it came down to choosing the story, it was all about what the community remembered, what we allowed ourselves to remember, and what we allowed ourselves to forget, you know? And like, I was really driven by the culture that we existed in from like 2008 to like 2013, because I'm just like, that time was so interesting. And I think it was during that time where I was just asking some of my friends, I'm like, yo, you remember when we used to get kicked out of Bayshore, or when we couldn't go to Mayfair, you know what I mean? Like, when they would have a stupid curfew that ended at 3 p.m., like, we can't do, you know, like, do y'all remember those things? You remember when they tore Northtown movie theaters down? Remember when we had to go all the way to the South Side just to go to Incrediroll? Now, we were sitting there thinking like, yo, we didn't have many spaces, so a lot of the spaces we did take was somebody's backyard, somebody's front porch, you know, at the lunch table, playing the NPS beat. Like, we found those spaces. And then I thought about the fact that Black people from Milwaukee are chameleons. You know, anywhere that we go, we can just mesh in and fit right in. And that just means that, because there's so many different type of Black people that live here. So I think when it came down to like what stories or what should be told, you know, honestly, I just let it flow. I talked to a lot of people. So that process was me like just sitting down talking to people, having like an hour Zoom session where I kind of told them, I was just like, let this be like an unofficial therapy session for you to like. So mind you, we got the bad about Milwaukee, we got the hurt and the pain that people were feeling, but then we also got the beauty and the joy and the history that I think a lot of us choose to forget sometimes, but then also that we like just ignorantly just kind of forget about. And I think it was through all those conversations where I was just like, oh, there's so many interpretations of this city that it came down to me, you know, finding, you know, specifically 3 people who could kind of encapsulate at least this moment, right? We had to tell something that was like, okay, how do we talk about the pain, but then don't make this a pain story, and talk about the joys and the beauty, and then also talk about what we hope that this city will be. And I think that's kind of how we processed it. We said, we're gonna talk about all this shit, so let's just do it. Like, let's just get to it.
Absolutely. And it's like, really, you know, some people be like, don't put us on blast, but it's also like, hold on, let's pull back the curtain. You know, there's a lot of conversations that we're not having. There's a lot of conversations that we're not having outside of our community. I think one of those things that I often see with people within the Black community, people within Milwaukee, and then people in general who have an interest in culture and community and cultivating that, there's always like, we've been having this conversation, y'all. We talk about this all the time. This is what we're talking about at the lunch table. This is what we're talking about in those barbecues. This is what we're talking about, you know, with our peers. We have this conversation constantly. Yeah. It's on a social front. It's on a political front. It's on a cultural front. And I think all too often, it's those outside of our community who really need to hear it. And I think film is a way that they can look behind the curtain in tangible chunks, right? They're always like, it's too much, it's overwhelming, I don't want to hear it. Racism, segregation, privilege. And you're like, right, calm down. Let's have this conversation without you talking. You can't talk to a film. I mean, you can scream at the screen, but you can't talk to them. And I think that's really important, and especially like you just said, short films, you know, it's a lot of time constraint within that. And so what you present, you know, has to weave together this narrative, and a really important one. So how do you feel, especially right now? You've been working on this project, it's about to release, but obviously we're in a really, really critical social climate, especially when it comes down to being Black, especially when it comes down to occupying spaces where we coexist with other people. Milwaukee, we have this conversation, one of the most segregated cities in our country. How do you grapple with that identity, presenting this storyline that goes with our city, knowing what's going on in society right now?
Yeah, it's really hard, it's difficult. And I think it's something as a filmmaker, like I always question, because to be honest, I am a researcher first. Like I got my degree in film studies. So like, I don't have a formal production degree, but I have a formal research degree in film studies. And I grapple with like the fact that documentary, like the origins of documentary are inherently anti-Black, are racist, are, you know, like the idea of surveillance, the idea of watching people. And to reconcile with those things in my art is the first thing that is difficult, but I make it happen. And then to come back to a place like Milwaukee, I think to grapple with that, I kind of live by this quote that is just like, let us see ourselves through mirrors and not screens. So whatever the screen tells us that we are, you know, and I'm gonna be very honest, I think the current climate of like film and TV as well, especially for the past couple of years, I would say like the post Trayvon Martin has been very much detailing what the screens or what the news tells us about ourselves. And obviously you get that. That's why we get some of the same stories about police brutality and all this other stuff. But what does it look like to put a mirror on a community? And it's all about putting a mirror on people so that they can see themselves. And I think when I left Milwaukee, I was trying so hard to affirm an identity for myself in other places, and that's what I mean by chameleon, right? We're so easy to kind of move and navigate because we can, you know, in these other spaces. And then I would get in these spaces and be like, y'all ain't loyal like my people in the city. Y'all don't have the vernacular like the people in my city. Y'all don't have the charisma like the people in my city. And it's nothing personal, right? But it's something that I realized that like, oh no, Milwaukee has a style, it has a lingo, it has a language, it's a movement, it's a flow. And I think we need to be able to see that. We need to be able to, like, people need to be able to look at Milwaukee and be like, that's where I'm from. I did that. Like, that's exactly where I'm from. And I'm proud to be from that place. Like, we are connected to the world just by being here because of how many different people. Yes, we're segregated, but think about the many different cultures that are steeped in this one city alone. And then on top of that, we have one of the largest Juneteenth parades. And I think we don't realize that because we just experience it. We're just here. So we're kicking it, right? And I think the more that people kind of sit back and realize, like, yeah, Milwaukee had their own kind of civil rights movement that was pretty intense, especially for like a Midwestern city. We had our own movements, we had our own style, we have our own lingo and all those things. They come to love it. But you don't see that unless somebody puts a mirror up for you to see the beauty in yourself. And I think it's so interesting. It's so weird that this film is coming out around this time too, especially because Milwaukee is one of the places that is now being credited for saving our democracy based on the Black vote here, right? And it's just like, it's just like, Milwaukee is getting a lot of attention as like a small metropolitan city. And I'm just like, just to let y'all know, I want y'all to understand that Black folk exist outside of Third Ward, outside of downtown, outside of those, of those kind of areas that white people populate, and that we live very complex lives. To be Black and to live in a place with 4 seasons, to live in a place that, like these are things, where our delicacy consists of fried fish and, spaghetti, as like spaghetti being a side, like where our cultures are so unique. Our language, whether we call Air Force One dookies or whether we, are having a conversation where on what is the primary use in our vernacular, that's us to understand. And I think at the core of it, the point of it is to kind of just think about Milwaukee and say, like, Milwaukee has given me so much, right? Milwaukee has took a lot from me. Milwaukee has taken so much from me, but they also were the place that gave me those things in the first place. And that's what, Casey, who was in our poem in the trailer, who's also in the film, she said that in her interview. She was just like, Milwaukee has given me so much, has taken so much away from me, but it also was the first place to give it to me. It was the first place to introduce me to love, loyalty, to affection, to intimacy. And it did take those things away, but I cannot forget that they were the first place to give it to me,
Absolutely. I totally feel that. I think it's like a lot of, reflecting a narrative that already exists, right? It's like always segmented out, it's distracted from, it's navigated around. And that's in the city in general. One of the things you talked about is like, yes, Black people exist in Milwaukee outside of the Third Ward, outside of these spaces where you're not used to seeing Black faces, even though they exist in those spaces, they're just not highlighted. And I think that's something that really resonates as well, is that, the navigation of our city, there are people and communities that totally avoid that we exist until it's time to harm us. Until it's time to harm us. And we're so focused on, existing and surviving in spaces. We learn their language. We learn how to navigate their spaces, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, what vernacular won't get us looked at all strange. We learn those things. We code switch. We code all the time. And it's never turned on its head and saying like, damn, if I want to navigate their spaces or, go through that, I should probably learn how to code switch as well in an authentic way, not in a way that is, absolutely offensive. But I think what you're doing is really, putting a light on the narrative that already exists. You're not inserting a new narrative. The narrative is there.
It's here.
Right. It's there. And I think it's just not discussed. And I think that has a lot to do even with that identity of like, that place is not Milwaukee. Like, I don't feel the same way when I'm in LA as I do when I'm at home or things like that. And I think that's exactly because of what you're doing right now. There have been filmmakers and creatives who have really put their cities on display. Musicians, recording artists, they put their cities on display, and we've seen it. We've seen the hustle and bustle. We've seen the grind. We've seen the happy stories. We've seen the sad stories. And I think in that, and we define that as Black culture of authenticity. We define that, and we've seen it, and we've never had our true moment as Milwaukee. We've been in the shadow, unfortunately, of other cities like Chicago, and people not even really feeling that from Milwaukee, like, hey, I can put my city on display and it had the same kind of impact, kind of aura. And I think what you're doing is going to kind of show that. And this is a part of a conversation that we've been having, is that Milwaukee has all those pieces plus more. And if somebody documents those things, if somebody, really puts the mirror on our culture and our community here, you'll see that. You'll see that. So I think that's dope. That's really dope. And I think even as you're talking about it, I can really see the researcher in you. I can see the researcher in you. And another piece of that shows is by the title of the movie, right? The Heartland. So can you tell everybody like where you got that from, the origins and all of that kind of stuff?
So giving honor and reverence to the indigenous communities who allow us to be present here, right? So I was thinking about the Heartland, and obviously there is a lot of different connotations around it, but I do think when it came down to when I was thinking about Milwaukee, and I think I was thinking about Milwaukee in comparison to other small metropolitan cities around, and each one has kind of their name or their stamp. And I was just like, yo, but I honestly feel like Milwaukee is the heart of the heartlands. Like, and I'm not saying that no one else has heart in their city, but I'm saying I think each city plays a role. I think, we have the heart. I think Detroit and Chicago have the grit. So I do think that there are each kind of big metropolitan city that houses Black people have their specific vibe or what they add to the heartlands. But I do think that Milwaukee is the heart of it. Like,
say that. Okay.
Yeah, too, like the fact that even during like the Great Migration, like we're all of us are products of Southern transplants. So like my great grandmother, who thank God is still alive, that's just a blessing, right? She's from Mississippi and she moved up here. She was originally in Chicago, but people migrate even from Chicago. They migrate even from Detroit. They migrate even from, all the other kind of Midwestern cities and come to Milwaukee either for better opportunities or quieter spaces or something like that. And it's really interesting to me that I'm just like, you would think that if you do find a space, why would you want to move here? I ask my grandmother all the time, why did she want to move to Milwaukee? And she's just like, I don't know, something just drew me here. I was thinking, I'm just like, yeah, it's the heart. There's so much heart in this city. Like there's so much confidence in this city. And I do think that that's kind of what I wanted to show. It is such a mix of everything. That's kind of what influenced me to call it the Heartland, and then give it a name, to affirm like this is what we think about this place, but to also kind of give reverence and honor to the indigenous communities and what that means for like land, and stuff like that. So I that's kind of how we came up with the Heartland.
Absolutely. Very fitting, very fitting.
Thank you.
Aisha, did you have something that you wanted to add in or anything you wanted to add?
Y'all honestly covered every question that I had. I'm looking at all my questions like that's one. But the question I did kind of come up with on the spot is, when did you start directing your movie? Was it during COVID and quarantine?
Yeah, so this movie is executive produced by Leaders Igniting Transformation under their Artist Activist Fellowship, which is a dope opportunity. But I did have to direct during COVID, and that was weird. We had to go through, to be sure that we were safe. And this is the thing too, because Milwaukee is also a vulnerable place. I do think, especially for this phantom virus. At the beginning of the summer, I released a film called Blind Spot, and it kind of was just like a piece about my grandmother. And it was around the time that like Black folk, elderly folk, especially in the city, were really getting hit hard by COVID. And I saw the severity of it. And I was like, God damn, this is something serious. So as we went into the process of like, okay, how are we going to do this in COVID? We had to be very sure like that we took care of ourselves, but we took care of our community. That skip us. How do we make sure that our people don't get it? And I think, with that took, us having to get tested regularly. We had to get tested regularly. At one point, y'all, it was like every other day. But it was intense, but we had to make sure we did it. We limited how many people could be in a room for an interview. We didn't step into people's homes. We didn't go into people's houses unless it was my house, And I'm grateful to say that nobody on my crew and nobody in my cast has contracted coronavirus, which I'm really happy about. I'm glad that everybody was healthy because that was a primary concern. And I do think as a filmmaker, it does take finesse, especially as a documentary filmmaker, it takes finesse. Period. And then to add COVID-19 on it, you're just like, ooh, I want to be intimate with this person. I want to be up close. I want to be personal. I want to be. So a lot of it was, us having to zoom in a lot, or us having to stand back and just catch the full frame and not get too close. And outside of coronavirus, we already know that like, so my director of photography is white. He was a cinematographer, and he was white. And I was just like, yo, you being white, I do want you to understand that you walking around a camera in some very vulnerable neighborhoods in this city. I'm not worried I'm not worried about your safety at those moments. I'm worried about what my people are thinking. So we had to have tough conversations about, all right, we're using this drone shot. How do we make sure that this doesn't seem like people are watching them? You know, like, how do we make sure that this doesn't feel like surveillance? It was a lot of difficult conversations, y'all. It was a lot of conversations that I think that I'm really happy we had, right? Because I think moving forward, as I am going to create now, that's the first place we start is what is our intention? What is our impact? What are we saying? How are we doing it? And how are we taking care of our people? And then we'll do the fun artsy stuff, and then we'll film it, and then we make it pretty. But those were a lot of hard conversations that we had to have up front about the safety of ourselves, the safety of others, and I think I really wish that a lot of other artists would take that into account as well. But that's how kind of the times we're living in. Yeah, so.
You know what, Tanisha, that was a great question.
It was, yeah.
Great question. And really, that is something I think that really needs to be exposed a little more is that, you know, being a creative is really important. Having creative works can be therapeutic. But usually people don't get to see what goes behind that process. And especially right now, creating is really important because there's so much that we need to let out. There's so much we need to let out. But what goes on behind that is the part that nobody sees. And the fact that you can even say that, like, you know, like you had to have those tough conversations. You know, you had to get the COVID test. You couldn't just avoid the fact that COVID's going on. You're making this, you know, because it does impact this community that you care about. It impacts your crew. It impacts you. And so I think it's really important to kind of, you know, suggest like creative processes can still happen, but you got to put the work in to make sure that people are safe, whether that's from a pandemic or whether that's from PTSD that can happen.
Yeah. It's funny because I do think, I want to just say this too. I think I am honored to be an artist, right? I think that is such a huge responsibility that one, people are okay with me going off and playing pretend and playing make-believe and playing with stories. Like, I don't take that for granted, right? And I do think as artists, we have a responsibility to tell the stories of the places that we call home and the people that we exist with. You know, I think that is one, our responsibility. But two, it's just like, all right, it's our responsibility to understand that some of the art forms that we are undertaking, again, come from racist, anti-Black foundations. So I have to always relearn about documentary. Like, all right, how do I not make this invasive? How do I not make this harmful? And it is such a difficult process, but it is one that is possible. And I wanted with this film to show that it is possible. Mind you, again, it's also a pandemic, y'all. Please do not stress yourselves out. Go to sleep, rest. Like, do nothing if you have to. Like, I'm not saying that you have to, you can do it, you know, because this is some BS. Like, and I think as Black folk, we are always bearing the responsibility of not only like capturing the movement, but being on the front lines as that movement is also happening. And that is such an exhausting job. So like, please go to sleep, right? Have your rest. But
say it again.
Go to sleep. Go to sleep. When I tell you, I had to prioritize sleep throughout this whole process. Usually my process with films and even with research, I will be up, y'all. I will be up writing or filming and but I had to prioritize my stamina for the past 4 months. Like, I had to prioritize that. Art takes so much from us. It takes so much from us. Like, so you have to be able to give yourself something back. So like, I think that is one like, that's kind of how I did it with this process. It was difficult, but I do think it makes me so much better that now this film is about to come out and I rested. Like, I'm about to kick it this weekend in my house, of course, because I don't play with COVID, but I'm really about to relax this weekend because I know that I prioritize that. And I told my crew to do the same. I said, don't overwork yourself. Don't do it, especially now. So one, I want people to know that it's possible to get sleep and create art. Two, you don't have to give one of those things up. And, you know, two, it's very much possible to continue to find ways to exist in this current moment without always feeling like you're defeated. You know, Milwaukee is it's such a, I don't like to say untapped market, but it is so many stories that deserve to be told. So yeah, just go crazy. Like, find something and make it.
Absolutely. I think that's great advice. I mean, I think you covered all the things that I want to know without giving spoilers of everything that we're going to see in this.
Yes.
You know, I just want to make sure that people make sure that they check it out. So where can people see your film once it is released?
Yeah, so y'all will be doing a limited release. And limited release means that it will just be available for a couple of days. So we will be doing a limited release on December 4th, starting from December 4th to December 9th. And y'all can find it exclusively on Vimeo. But if you follow our Instagram page at the Heartland Film, you'll learn all more information, and you'll be able to have that link for when it come up so you can watch it. So stay tuned. We got a lot of more stuff for y'all. We got a lot of more stuff. We're really excited to make this film more than just a film, but a movement of pride, a movement of like what's next to come in this city. There's so many stories we got to tell y'all. So yes, please follow at the Heartland Film for more information. And December 4th is coming.
Absolutely. Thank you, Marquise May, so much. We really appreciate you taking this time to talk to us, giving us that little insight, and really refreshing us, okay, on being able to make it during this time. So I really appreciate it. So, for CopyWrite Magazine, this is, y'all got
Marquise Mays, independent filmmaker residing in the city.
Hey, and
intern Tanasia Shaw.
All right. Loving all things urban. Peace.